Hi, I'm Yash. The title of my talk today, what we'll be discussing today, is Start Small, Scale Big. We'll be discussing on building and scaling platforms and SRE culture at startups and how to scale that as the startup grows rapidly in scale up. So this is all about me. I've been here working for the last 7 years, based in Bangalore. Currently work as engineering manager at Topline. Started my career as a developer, developing payment products for PayU payments in India. I have been DevOpsing for companies like Setu, Wildest Capital, and 2C2P here in Singapore, and Topline, where I work currently. And I love to contribute to design and development of distributed systems and complex cultures stuff. These are my links for email, LinkedIn, if anyone wants to connect, post the talk, post the conference. So let's start. In the introduction, we'll be discussing what site reliability engineering is. We are all engineers here attending SREcon, so we all already know. But AWS defines site reliability engineering as a practice to automate IT infrastructure tasks so that the software applications that companies serve remain reliable, so that the practices that we implement improve the reliability and scalability of software systems. By removing manual hurdles, implementing automation and stuff. This is how AWS on a higher level defines SRE. Platforms engineering. Platforms engineering is designing and building internal developer platforms to enable self-service capabilities within engineering teams for organizations of any scale. Platform teams apply software engineering principles to accelerate software delivery and help productionize the code faster and in a much sustainable and better way. Platform engineers ensure application development teams are productive and spend less time managing their infrastructure and remove the toil from operations. Now, this is just because we are talking about startups and scale-ups, this just gives an overview of what a startup, what a scale-up, and what a large org looks like, and what are the stark differences between them. These are not very accurate borderline figures. These are just estimates for the purpose of this talk. A startup could be defined as an org of 5 to 20 engineers, scale of 50 to 200. Large org obviously has a lot of engineers. Startups are focused in developing their first product and achieving product market fit. Scale-ups are in a rapid growth phase of their product or products. They have multiple in some cases and have already achieved PMF and are now scaling and building on top of that. Large organizations, of course, have multiple products. Startups are trying to establish a business model, iterating on the business model and finding the right fit. Scale-ups have a proven business model and are now growing and scaling it. Startups have no revenue, are in a pre-seed or Series A stage, and similarly, scale-ups have some revenue and are in Series B to D stage. Startups have ballpark figures only. So this is a broad picture so that we align in the future of this conversation that we are going to have today in the next 40 minutes, align on the goals and the needs of startups and a scale-up based on these factors. So the goal of a startup is to develop the product and find PMF, scale-ups stabilize the product. Startup have a go-to-market and onboarding a few customers as their top priority, while scale-ups already have customers and they need to scale their sales and their infrastructure and their product to serve those. Startups focus on absorbing feedback from the customer and rapidly building on top of them. A lot of us have already worked for a startup. We know we release multiple times a day. We don't have dated releases of releasing twice a week or thrice a week kind of thing. Scale-ups build stable features, more reliable features because they have a large customer base and a little hiccup here and there could damage their trust. Scale-ups are more frugal, but startups on the other hand have a lot of money at their hand and prefer saving time than money. Going to market, releasing their product is more important for them. So how does reliability and platform engineering help a startup or a scale-up? So at the core of it, reliability engineering and platform engineering are the same thing. They have the same basic principles and the pillars of automation. They both share the philosophy of DevOps in practice. Stability and scalability sit at the core of it, with collaboration between cross-functional teams and cross-org teams, and continuous improvements and feedback. In short, just make other lives easier. Now, how do we imbibe SRE and platform engineering philosophies into an engineering org? At a startup or a scale-up, when the org is a smaller size, and how do we grow with that? So the most important thing is to align with business needs, aligning the platforms with the needs of the business at that point of time. Tech is used to serve the business, not the other way around. So implementing technology to enable business and business requirements, saving money, of course, either earn more money or save, and not get influenced by industry trends and implement new shiny stuff, but implement what your business needs. Avoid fancy technology. Fancy technology, most of the times you either don't need fancy technologies like Kubernetes, or it slows you down. And as we discussed earlier, releasing faster and going to market faster is your priority. Working through constraints. You have multiple constraints in a smaller org, and we'll see what those constraints are and how to navigate through them. But you have to work through constraints, and you have to navigate through them and make engineering sustainable while implementing these philosophies. And staying adaptable while scaling. In startup or scale-up, you scale very rapidly. From 2 engineers to 10 engineers to 20 to 200, you go very fast. You iterate very fast. You release products very fast. And your needs for your business and your tech org change very rapidly. So how do you stay adaptable? We should start with an engineering charter, not a SRE or a platform charter, but an engineering charter which highlights and defines your philosophies and your culture and how you want to go about implementing in your org. And a separate SRE or a platform charter can be defined and at a later time while scaling out. Taking short-term decisions should be prioritized, but while still keeping long-term vision in mind. Tech stacks, principles, and philosophies in the SRE culture need to be adaptable. Today you are using X technology, and next week or next month some business needs change and you need to scale out. You need to be able to change very rapidly and adapt to a new thing. Achieving business excellence is an immediate priority. You need to achieve GTM, you need to achieve PMF at that early stage. Achieving technical excellence and operational excellence in tech is not the priority of the business at that scale and at that point of time. That can be done later. The examples for this, using SaaS and managed services instead of self-hosting your own Postgres or SQL or any other database or any other services would be much efficient for you. Starting out with a monolith and not getting into the complexities of developing microservices architecture and multiple microservices, hosting them, managing them, creating API gateways, service discovery, service meshes on top of that, unnecessary. Dockerize your services, but not necessarily use Kubernetes or nomads. When you use Dockerize, when you use Docker and Dockerize your services, you keep a scope of improvement later at stage, where when you need scale, you can move on to bigger and much scalable platforms. But when you start, you can just use Docker Compose to run your product on a single EC2 machine or a VPS. Use SaaS observability providers, but with OTel, Open Telemetry Exporters. Use Grafana, use Datadog Cloud, use New Relic, whatever you want. But use Open Telemetry Exporters so that when you want to switch, maybe later, or you might not, but if you want to switch later between observability providers and want to self-host later, you don't need to change your entire instrumentation code and the exporter libraries and stuff. You just need to plug and play into a new backend of your observability stack. Use infrastructure as code, always the best practice, have been there for a long time, core of it. and implement continuous delivery. Continuous delivery saves time and deployments are boring. All of us already know that. Setting up a SRE culture from the first engineer is extremely important because the first engineers gatekeep bullshit out of our engineering practices and culture. It is very important to do that because as you scale, as you get new people rapidly, you will get a lot of bullshit coming in terms of, not in terms of people necessarily, but in terms of practices, culture, tooling, tech, a lot of biases come in. So this keeps dumb shit out of it. Ensure that reliability remains at the core of your engineering culture as it scales. It is difficult, it becomes difficult if you try to implement SRE cultures at a later stage. A lot of startups I've seen back in India, across Europe, where they prioritize just releasing their product into the market and everything. And at a later point, they decide, oh, we needed to implement reliability, our product is not secure, our product goes down a lot of time our developers are spending in deployments and stuff. So it's important that you implement those on day one, and your first engineer will help you do that. No SRE model. Thanks to the PlayStation Network team for their talk yesterday. I got the word from there. Works wonders for you. Implement that philosophy, not the role, not the team. Implement the philosophy. You don't need an SRE engineer when you start up or when you are scaling in a team of 10, 20 engineers. You need the principles, you need the philosophies, and you need the culture. You don't need a role or the designation. Ones who write the code should deploy and operate on the code and on their services, and they are the best people to do that. So how do you strategize for developing SRE cultures in constraints? What are the constraints that we have, and how to navigate through them? Time, the biggest constraint in a startup or a scale-up. Go-to-market is the real deal. If some other competitor goes with their product before you, that's a deal breaker, and you might miss on revenue, you might miss on product market fit, you might miss on the first few important customers that will give you the best feedback and spread the word. So there isn't much time to get to tech utopia. You need to implement business first, ship or die. Money being the second constraint. Frugality, I have seen excellence coming out of frugality. So frugality is one thing, and especially in the current market conditions, everyone is frugal, everyone wants free cash flow. So being frugal is best. There's no money to waste. Startups don't have money, we just saw. People, there is a constraint with people as well. People come with biases, people come with their own opinions. That's good. But sometimes it also hampers the growth of a startup and how it wants to grow. So having that culture defined while you are scaling on people is also very important. And knowledge, different team members you'll have on different scale. When you hire for a startup, you don't hire for the bus effect. You hire different engineers to complement each other and not as supplements. So different people, different engineers will have different skill sets, different scales of experiences, and they might not all come on the same page while implementing stuff. So you don't want to spend time on trainings, learnings and stuff. You want to implement. When you are in a startup working 50, 60 hours a week, you need to implement shit immediately and not wait for people to learn and do all that stuff immediately. So that's one constraint that you get. Decisions regarding suitable technology and services. This is one of the most important things when you scale up, because decisions are long-term and have implications in the long term. The cool and the best is not always the most suitable. And the first thing and the first methodology that you think is almost always the wrong choice. So how do you go about deciding stuff? Monolith versus microservices. Microservices sound fun. Let's implement those, but they might not really help your business grow at that stage and at that scale. When you start off, you need monoliths. Microservices, you don't really have time to develop microservices. However experienced, however good your engineers are, you don't really have time to build and scale microservices. Self-hosting versus managed services. You don't have time to build your own database or your own logging system. You need to use some existing managed services. Maybe it's provided by your own cloud or some other vendor like New Relic, Grafana, MongoDB Atlas for databases. You don't need to build your own, just use someone existing who has already built it. what is the output of your CI? Binaries, executables, or do you deploy containers or functions? That's also one decision. If you are just scaling out, and if you are just starting up and you don't have a lot of scale coming in your product, you can just deploy a binary or a Java file as an executable if you have a Java application, and don't really need to containerize or make it as a Lambda function, put a fancy API gateway on top of it, make authorization, everything. You just go about deploying the executable on an EC2 instance, saves time, gets you up and going immediately. Datadog or Salesforce TLK or Signos for observability. Just get on with the managed services as we saw earlier, save time, save money for now. We'll see what happens later. Real-time sync or event-driven batch, whatever sounds fancy, don't do that. Database, in-house or managed, of course. SaaS or self-hosted takes time, takes money, takes engineering bandwidth. So you don't really have that right now. You need to develop your products. You need to develop features requested by your customers. You need to iterate fast on customer issues. So prioritize using SaaS rather than building infrastructure in-house. That can be done later by scaling. So prioritize building business logic versus building infra for yourself. Synergy between platform engineering and DevOps and SRE, we've all been listening, DevOps is dead, SRE is dead, platform is the new shit. Why? They're all the same thing. DevOps sits at the core of it. In practice, everything that an SRE does is similar to what a platform engineer does or a so-called DevOps engineer does. It's exactly the same. Especially when you start up, you don't really need separate role. Generalists are the best to do stuff, implement stuff, and all these. We are just engineers. So there are shared goals, which is growing the business. Collaboration and cross-functional work. An SRE or a platform engineer in a startup would be required to take care of compliances, security, observability, deployments, developing platforms and stuff. You don't really, again, as I said earlier, you don't need roles. You need people and you need philosophies and people who implement those philosophies. Automation and standardization, continuous feedback and improvements, and again, make others' lives easier, especially your customers. Choosing to host fancy infrastructure, choosing to host managed Kubernetes and fancy services like those will not help your customer. Your features and your product will do. Open source your SRE and platforms. When you're building out, you don't have a very large team to develop platforms and SRE. Open source it. Ask your developers to contribute back to the platform and get more hands on that. This way, we'll democratize knowledge as well, and everyone will be accustomed with how to build. And people who are building those platforms are the ones actually using it. Your developers in your company and the product, full stack developers, product engineers are your customers when you are a SRE and platform engineer in your company. And if they are contributing back into the product that they are using, they'll be doing the best, and you'll do the justice to invite contributions from them. Also, I realized this morning, I added this slide just this morning. It's day 2, where the fudge is security. We have not talked about security. We have not talked about compliance and SecOps the entire previous day, and I don't think we'll be talking about this here as well. But security, information security, cybersecurity, compliance, and SecOps become very important when you start. And it becomes difficult as you scale to implement in between and bring security as a function in between. Brings a lot of toil for the engineers, becomes pain, and security then becomes just a blocker from releasing, oh, I have this security issue, I'll not let the product get released. Now the product team is complaining to the security engineers, and then the war starts. So implementing these when you are small, when you are in the first few engineers, really helps go the long way. So I'll be discussing 2 case studies now that I have implemented as a leader of SRE and platforms in my past 2 startups. First was Setu, and the second one is Topline, where I'm currently working. So I joined Setu. Setu is a API banking infrastructure for India's financially excluded millions and billions. And it is India's own Stripe, so to say. They have services on payments, lending, deposits, investments, KYC, all served over UPIs for business to give those services to their customers in their product in form of embedded finance. So I joined Setu in March of 2020. And at that time, we just made the first product live. We had zero in revenue, no revenue. We had some $15 million as funding sitting in our bank. The first product had 3 microservices, which served a few thousand API requests per month. We processed a few GBs of data, and we had 5 engineers in total. I was a platform engineer there. In May 2022, I left Setu and moved on to Topline. And in May 20, I am not very sure about what's the state there, but in May 2022, when I left, we had 8 products live across payments, investments, lending, KYC. We had around 50 microservices receiving around 25 million API requests per minute. India sees a lot of scale. We have the largest population, 1.4 billion, finance being one of the most important use cases to solve in India. We do get scale. So 25 million API requests per month, 50 TBs of data processing every month across customer data, payment data, logs, metrics, everything. And we had 8 product teams, each of small pods of 4 or 5 engineers each, total of around 30 engineers. And we still had just 2 platform engineers. How did we achieve that? How did we start? Let's see in this case study. So when we started, we had 3 microservices deployed. We used AWS all across for all of our services. Services were containerized and deployed on Elastic Beanstalk. This was the first decision that we took. We will not be going with ECS or EKS or Nomad or whatever. We'll just use plain Dockerized Elastic Beanstalk service, which is just a plug and play service, which just lets you get up and running in just a few minutes. You just need to bring your own Docker file. That's it. Infrastructure was managed in Terraform. This is one very important thing that we decided on day one, that we'll Terraformize and have all of our infrastructure as code. But the DevOps team, the platform team, was responsible for all the infra changes, security, compliance, and peripherals, everything. So the responsibilities of deployment, infrastructure, security, compliance were decoupled from the product development team to the platform team. And I was the one managing all these ad hoc things as well. The deployments were manual. And then in May, the leadership decided to launch a new product. And we had 15 days to build and launch the second payment product. And then we realized in June that we'll be launching a lot of more products. We had the product team at Setu had a target of launching 5 different products in different categories of finance. By the end of December, we had 6 months to launch 5 more products. And if we had to scale our SRE and DevOps practices, we needed to scale our platform. We wouldn't have been able to hire each SRE and embed them in each product team and then let them manage stuff there. So we built out a platform. We decided to build out the platform. And when we started, the problems that we faced were solved in that platform. The problems that we faced were deployments involved downtime. Elastic Beanstalk is one of the very good services in AWS, which involves downtime while deployments, unfortunately. Change management across products and patching across infrastructure was extremely difficult. It was all manual, and it lacked standardization. One team used RabbitMQ for queues, the other team used SQS for queues. So the use case was the same, but the familiarity that the engineers had in those teams and led to them deciding different technologies and different standards for developing their products. Writing new infrastructure was boring because every week, if you are deploying new features, new stuff, need new infrastructure, deploying and writing new infrastructure is boring and time-taking. Why not spend that time building your product, which is more important? Multiple regulatory audits. So we were a fintech company, and the Reserve Bank of India is a very responsible central bank and imposes a lot of compliances and audits on their companies. So there were a lot of regulatory audits. Every time we wanted to partner with a bank or another financial organization, we had to undergo an audit. And audits would take a day or two. someone from the big four would come down and take 2-3 days of our time and bandwidth, and I had to sit with another engineer because things were decoupled. I did not have knowledge of product development. The engineer on the product development team didn't have knowledge on the infra, so we both had to spend time with our compliance manager. Now, 3 of us are sitting with a big four auditor, or in spending time in going through all these recurring audits and VAPTs for our infra. While we have been, we could have spent that time building our product. And the flow of architectural decisions were decentralized. Everyone was defining their own. The team was still a very small team of 10, 12 developers, around 3 teams in June. But it was difficult to standardize, and it was all decentralized. Then we decided to platformize everything. We modularized the self-serve infrastructure as code in Terraform. It has all the components that any product development team would ever need at Setu. And if new teams and new products would need new features in that platform, we'd rapidly build those into the platform, not specifically for that team, but we'll build that into the platform for others to use. This is very standard practice. It had ECS-based containerized deployments, which were scalable. Canaries were enabled there. RDS and MongoDB-based databases. And site-to-site VPN with multiple bank infrastructures. This was all plug and play, and based on flags, the product teams could choose to switch one or the other thing off in their configuration. Feature-packed hardened Packer AMIs for running the services on EC2. ELK-based observability for logs and metrics. We didn't prioritize traces. We did some testing with the Jaeger on local development, and figured we don't really need tracing because a lot of downstream services are those of banks, and we don't really have any control of it. Even if we apply traces there and we find out there are a lot of requests which are going downstream to banks infrastructure, taking a lot of time, we didn't have any control on how to optimize on those. So we decided not to go after traces. Alerting incident management on PagerDuty and Slack. Every engineer was 24/7 on call. There were no on-call rotation policies. We didn't prioritize them. We had a very small team, so everyone was on call all the time. The platform had built-in security and compliance. The platform was ISO 27001 2013 compliant with RBI SAR and other audit compliances imposed by banks and National Payments Commission of India. We were star level 1 certified by the Cloud Security Alliance. By May 2022, we had 8 live products. We saw these metrics before just to recapture them here. 8 live products across payments, investments, lending, and KYC domains, over 50 microservices in production, 25 million API requests, blah, 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 and 2 platform engineers handling these. We prioritized and discussed initially and decided on that we will not be a service team, we'll be a product team as a platform team also. So we productized our platform and not as a service. The developers owned all these things. And this is how the dev teams use the platform. The platform code was imported as a submodule in the developer product repository. And dev team would add custom code. We enabled extensibility for the platform, and we enabled the dev team and empowered them to add custom code on top of them to extend the platform. And the dev team would also regularly contribute features. Remember, we talked about open sourcing within your team. So this is how they contributed back features into our own platform, which in turn they use themselves. And then they would be free to operate on it, deploy, destroy, apply, whatever. And this is how we centralized the flow of architectural decisions into the platform. So multiple dev teams would come up with multiple requirements, multiple architectures, and multiple requirements of services and practices. And all of these would come down into the architecture team, which was composed of all the engineering leads at Setu. And we take the feedback on existing platform, and we'll take feedback and suggestions on new features and new tooling, and then build that out into the platform. This way, we debated, discussed on the best way to move forward. The impact was that going to production for a product depended only on writing business logic. You didn't have to write your infrastructure. You didn't have to worry about what services should I use, how I should use my queues, how I should use my databases, how should I connect with them, how do I manage my secrets, how do I do logging metrics. Everything was built out, and people just had to write business logic and get their product out to production. All SRE components were built into the platform from day zero of development. Development team owned end-to-end infrastructure and operations of their products. Setu had to undergo 20 InfoSec compliance audits a year, which would usually take 2 to 3 days for each audit. But it was all seamless and one click and left only to the compliance officers. No platform engineers or development engineers were harmed in any compliance audit. Pull request to release time went down to 10 minutes, which was earlier 30 minutes and above. It just went down to 10 minutes, all the end-to-end testing, feature testing, everything, and to release into the hands of the customers took 10 minutes. We standardize infra practices across the business, across all the products, across all engineering departments. In June 2022, Setu was acquired by Pine Labs, a Decacon fintech enterprise in India, and operates independently. And last I checked, on the same principles even today. The second case study that I want to discuss is Topline, where I currently work and take care of their platform as an engineering manager. Topline, when I joined Topline, Topline was already 9 months, 10 months old. And we already had some good practices there. But I came with my own biases, I came with my own opinions. And in this case, along with the director of engineering and director of platform, we implemented those biases and opinions in a good way. And for the business, not for the tech and for excitement, but for the business. So Topline is a platform used by Cloudflare, Vercel, Canva for the sales pipeline. For the self-serve funnel, we help build companies their sales pipeline and bring their conversion rates higher from 2 to 3%. That goes up to whatever good we can do. We have seen 50, 70% as well. In June 2022, when I joined, we had one product live. We were a monolith with a few services spread across Lambdas and Airflow. We had a few thousand API requests, tens of TBs of data. We had the team of 5 data scientists, 3 data engineers, and 5 full stack developers. There was no standard infrastructure as code across the org. Different SRE practices, the same SRE practice, SRE practice was instilled from day one from the first engineer itself. We were lucky to have very mature, very cultured engineer join us in the beginning. We had automated deployments, and I was their only platform SRE. When we moved, as I look back, in 1 year, currently we have the product live. We don't have multiple products. We have just one product. It's still a monolith. We have still not considered moving to a microservices architecture. We don't need it right now, and I don't think we'll need for a good time. Our services are spread across data services, product services, platform services across Lambda, Batch, and Airflow. 100 of TBs of data is processed within Snowflake, Postgres in Topline per month. Our team has still not expanded to a lot. 5 data scientists, 4 data engineers, 10 full stack developers working on standardized infrastructure code platform. This is a basic thing that we did, and it has solved all of our problems that we had and has standardized our SRE practices. And this is something that I brought with my learning from the previous org, Setu, that we just discussed in our previous case study. Continuous delivery came into picture for all the services. Devs own their ops. There is no need for a service-based support team or a separate SRE team. Devs own their own ops. And we still are just 2 platform SREs. So the state of platforms at Topline right now is we don't use Kubernetes. We have no use case of Kubernetes, and we'll not be using Kubernetes for a good time. We prefer native AWS services. We don't go out building our own services. However, we have migrated from, we started using managed workflow for Apache Airflow, which is a managed Airflow service of AWS. Then we moved on to self-hosting that because we needed to do that. Managed Airflow from AWS outsized our needs, and our needs outsized that service, and we wanted to have more control on that service, so we self-hosted that. We migrated our observability stack from Grafana after using it for 2 years, Datadog, after using it for 2 years to a self-hosted Loki Grafana, Tempo, and Mimir stack of Grafana to save cost, most importantly. Datadog, we recently learned Coinbase spent 65 million on Datadog in a year. So we were also spending some bit, not really close to that. Platform team produces self-serve infra and services for data science, data engineering, and platform teams. We don't do services, we do give support and stuff, but not in a traditional support way. Regular knowledge sharing in a fast-moving org is important to sustain the culture of SRE. So that everyone is aware of what is happening in platforms and how the culture evolves with that. Push to release takes 8 to 10 minutes, including CI, SecOps, infra updates, and continuous delivery, everything automated within GitHub Actions. We didn't go out to self-hosting our own CI things. We didn't need that. Platform is the product of the SRE team, not a service of the SRE team. And we support the teams, the data science, data engineering, and product teams in form of new features and not really sitting with them in operations. Now we move on to the next part of this discussion. How Google or Netflix do SRE is not really the way or a good place for startups to start with. We've all read the book, the SRE workbook. Multiple SRE books are there by Google. Why are they not the good place to start for a startup? And we have a lot of open source Netflix projects for SRE and platforms. Why are they not a good place to start? Because difference in requirements, they had different requirements than when they built out those products. The business requirements were different, the tech requirements are different. Our business requirements, our tech requirements are different than they had. The scale that they operated on are different than what we need and what we want to implement in our scale. So we don't just blindly go after them. Okay, Netflix has done Spinnaker. You don't really need Spinnaker. Everything had, their needs had outsized every CI or CD tool they had. Then they built Spinnaker. You don't really do that. You can just get away with the GitHub Actions and you might also not necessarily implement every power and every capability of GitHub Actions. Maturity of the org. These bigger orgs have extremely mature engineers who have worked for multiple years. Some are doing PhDs even. We have a lot of those gentlemen among us. Maturity of the org, maturity of the engineering teams, maturity of the business is also something that you might not be currently there. And especially budgets. They have a lot to spend, you don't. So don't blindly follow. Evaluate. Do know the principles, do know the methodologies, but don't blindly implement those. Just focus and implement what's best for you. Mold them into what your business needs, what your team needs, what your tech needs, and implement in your org. Conclusions. So in conclusions, we see a framework for setting up a culture of SRE and platforms in startup or a scale-up. Implement principles, not the role or a team. Implement culture, bring the culture, instill a culture of site reliability engineering and platform engineering in your teams. Standardize stuff and make it extensible so that people who are importing that and working on those platforms can extend and build on top of that and don't restrict them to just use what you have built. Stay adaptable. Tomorrow your needs may change, tomorrow your culture may change, tomorrow your business may change or tech may change, and that may require adapting to a new set of practices, set of culture, set of tooling. Be adaptable. Prioritize business need over exciting tech. You need to prioritize business needs, and as we discussed, ship or die. Iterate towards perfection. Don't rush for it, but don't add tech debt. You can iterate for perfection. You won't find and you won't achieve perfection in the first run. So iterate towards it. And anyway, the perfect tool practice culture does not really exist. Every time you will have something better to do. Use plug and play managed services to start with. prefer productization over services. As we discussed in both of my previous case studies, the SRE platforms team were not service-based support team. They were platform-based product teams where the platform was a product and you support the users and your customers that are the other dev teams and data science teams and data engineering teams with more features, more infrastructure, more practices, and more standardized tooling built into your platform. And just get the shit done. That's the goal of any business. Just get the shit done. And also, in the end, don't get exciting ideas from conferences, podcasts, YouTube videos, and rush to implement in your org. Evaluate carefully, run ADRs on top of them, have discussions within your team on what you learned and what you need to take away from these conferences, podcasts, and YouTube videos. They are all exciting and knowledgeful, but do whatever is best for your business and your team. Talking of adaptability, this is just one thing that I wanted to highlight. This is June 2020. The left side is June 2020, where Coinbase came out with a very extensive article on why they are not using Kubernetes. It was extremely knowledgeful article for everyone. We should all really read that article. Extensive article on why Coinbase at that time in June 2020 did not use Kubernetes. And right side is June 2022, another very extensive and very knowledgeful article why Coinbase is using Kubernetes. So they stayed adaptable. They built their platforms to scale out. And when they needed that scale, they were ready to implement whatever they needed and adapt. So this is one thing we should take away from bigger orgs, that stay adaptable, build for scale. That is all for today. Thank you so much for being the wonderful audience that you were. Thank you.